Hello, my name is Jakaro Melton, and I am the Tribal Transit Program Manager here at the Federal Transit Administration. Today, I'll be discussing the Tribal Transit Competitive Program, which had its Notice of Funding Opportunity published on May 27th. This presentation was originally given live online on June 29th. But unfortunately, we were unable to capture a recording of that particular presentation. So a couple of days after the fact, we are re-recording the presentation utilizing the same slides that were in the original presentation, in addition to a few slides at the very end addressing some questions that came up during the course of the live conversation that I felt were really germane to the topic at hand, and I wanted to just discuss the answers that we provided in the course of the original conversation for this recorded one. So if you are in need of the presentation that was presented on June 29th, either because you were in it and wanted a reference, or if you missed it and want to get the information, this presentation will provide everything that you need. So we have a few agenda items for today's conversation. We'll be looking at the Federal Transit Administration's objectives as it pertains to the Tribal Transit Program. We'll be giving a brief history of the Tribal Transit Program. Then we'll be moving into who or what tribes are eligible for the application process. Also, what projects are eligible for this particular competitive program. We'll also discuss what the evaluation criteria are for applications. So discussing what exactly the people who will be evaluating the applications are looking for when they receive and are reading over your application. Finally, we'll be giving a very brief overview of Grants.gov, which is a system that you will utilize to upload all of your grant information and application. I hope you enjoyed that brief video that was put together by our communication staff here at the Federal Transit Administration. I really enjoy showing that video in part because I think it's a really great encapsulation about what the Tribal Transit Program is all about. We're here to help provide transportation to tribal communities and, in a broader sense, our rural populations. And here you are today to learn about how exactly you can bring these types of services to your particular communities. So just following in line with that video, let's discuss briefly about what exactly the Federal Transit Administration's objectives are with the Tribal Transit Program. So the Tribal Transit Program and its competitive awards help FTA pursue its objectives by providing timely and efficient investment in public transportation. This also supports the President's Build Back Better initiative to mobilize American ingenuity to build a modern infrastructure and an equitable, clean energy future. Then also it falls very much in line with advancing the goals of President Biden's January 20th of 2021 executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. If you're not familiar with this particular executive order, if you've downloaded the presentation, you can actually click on the hyperlink and it'll take you right to the executive order. But briefly, the executive order itself deals with the allocating of federal resources to advance fairness and opportunity. That's the objective that federal agencies have been charged with by the Biden administration, to make sure that federal resources get out to people who need it most. Also with that, we're working to engage with members of underserved communities. With the directives that we saw in the previous slide from both the Federal Transit Administration itself as well as the Biden administration, we did launch our Notice of Funding opportunity on May 27th. That was published in the Federal Register. If you're here or you're listening to this presentation, you're probably well aware of that. Another important date to think of and keep in mind as we move forward with the NOFO and as you get ready to submit your application if you haven't already, those applications are going to be due on August 25th of this year, 2021, at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. We're here today to discuss the Federal Transit Administration's Tribal Transit Program. But before we start discussing the history of the program, or how much money is in the program, or what the criteria are for making evaluations of this year's particular Notice of Funding opportunity, we need to talk about the objectives of this program. The Tribal Transit Program is here to provide direct funding to federally recognized Indian tribes so they can provide public transportation service on and around Indian reservations or tribal land in rural areas. The eligible entities for the Tribal Transit Program are federally recognized Indian tribes or Alaska Native villages, groups, or communities as identified by the U.S. Department of Interior. Just to give you an idea about how many tribal entities are included in that eligibility scope, on January 29th of 2021, the Bureau of Indian Affairs published in the Federal Register a listing of 574 tribal entities. As it relates to the Federal Transit Administration, we deal with approximately 220 tribal recipients. Since we've gone over the objectives and the eligibility for the Tribal Transit Program, it's probably good just to give a very brief overview of the history of the Tribal Transit Program. The Tribal Transit Program is a set-aside of the formula grants for rural areas. In FTA speak and FTA parlance, we commonly refer to that as Section 5311 or just 5311. The program itself was initiated during the course of fiscal year 2006 in a Surface Transportation Program authorization commonly referred to as Safety Lou. Safety Lou actually stands for something. It stood for Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, a legacy for users. President George W. Bush signed that authorization, and it actually expired in September of 2009. And just for trivia purposes, Alaska Representative Don Young did a lot in terms of spearheading and getting that through Congress, and his wife's name is actually Lou. So when the program was originally born during fiscal year 2006, it had $8 million set away for competitive programs, which we are talking about today. By the time the program, or the authorization rather, had gotten ready to expire in September 2009, that competitive program had grown to $15 million a year. In fiscal year 2013, there was a new authorization. That authorization goes by the common name of MAP 21. MAP 21 stands for Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. Barack Obama signed that, and it actually expired not long after it was signed. It expired in fiscal year 2014. In it, though, it provided $25 million for a formula program. So in addition to a competitive program, in fiscal year 2013, birthed the formula program for the Tribal Transit Program. Also, there was a $5 million built in for the competitive program. As I mentioned in the previous slide, MAP 21 expired in fiscal year 2014. What happened after that was an extension of MAP 21 for 2 years. Then in fiscal year 2016, we had the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or as we refer to it here in FTA, the FAST Act. That continued the Tribal Transit Program and increased the amount made available under the formula program. So we had $30 million set for the formula program in the FAST Act, and then for the competitive, we still had that $5 million that was present during the course of MAP 21. So you might be at this point in time listening to this conversation, and we have a new Surface Transportation Act. But at this present day, the FAST Act is still being carried out. We're again in a period of extension of the FAST Act. So in the interim, the Tribal Transit Program is continuing along this $30 million for the formula program and $5 million for the competitive. But more funding has been made available for this particular fiscal year 2021, due to the number of relief packages that we've had related to COVID-19. On this slide, we have a breakdown of the fiscal year 2021 Tribal Transit Program funding. If you had a chance to see the NOFO that went out for the competitive program, you probably noticed that there was now $10 million associated with it. That's different from the $5 million that had been there from the FAST Act. How did we get the $10 million, you might ask? So to give you the answer, $5 million came from the American Rescue Plan Act. You might have heard of it referred to as ARP or ARPA. So we had $5 million from there, along with a continuation of the FAST Act at $5 million. That got us to $10 million for this year's Tribal Competitive Program. In addition to that $10 million for the competitive side, we still have our formula funds. Formula funds are just a carryover this year from the $30 million that we had in the FAST Act, but additionally we have the COVID-19 response money. That came in the form of fiscal year 2020's Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, commonly referred to as CARES. That was an additional $30 million. In fiscal year 2021, we had Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations, commonly referred to as CRISA. That was an additional $30 million. And then finally, what we've had is the fiscal year 2021, the ARP Act. So in addition to the $5 million we got for the competitive program, we also have another $30 million from the ARP Act that the Tribal Transit Program has been administering via formula. And with all this additional money that's come into the program, it's just important to note that if your tribe has not yet taken advantage of these other funds out there, I would just very much encourage you to get these funds. At last count, there was about 83% of the CARES Act funds that had been obligated or had gone out the door, but that means that there's still 17% that have not. There's also other money in the other two funds, the CRISA and the ARP. Those funds are there for tribes, so if you have a need for funding and it fits within the criteria, please take advantage of the opportunities that are available. Since we've discussed the level of funding that is available, it's important to get an idea about who's eligible for these funds and for the Tribal Competitive Program. Eligible applicants for the Tribal Competitive Program are going to be federally recognized Indian tribes or Alaska Native villages, groups, or communities as identified by the U.S. Department of Interior in rural areas with populations of less than 50,000. In terms of the level of funding that will be available, FTA may choose to fund the program for more or less than the announcement amount. Just as a note, in the previous awarding period, we had $5 million listed in the NOFO for fiscal year 2020. We actually gave out $7.7 million, in part because we were able to reclaim funds that hadn't been utilized from previous awarding of the Tribal Competitive Program. So as a result, we had more money to give out last year. The period availability for awards is 1 year for the obligation and then an additional 2 years. So think of it this way: if the awards are obligated for fiscal year 2021, you'll have until fiscal year 2024 before the award will be considered lapsing, and you will potentially have the funds taken back if you have not utilized them yet. As we displayed in a previous slide, COVID-19 has changed the amount of funding that's available in the Tribal Transit Program. In a much similar vein, just the circumstances in which we find ourselves has led us to make a few tweaks to the nature of the eligible projects that we will be accepting during the course of this Tribal Transit Competitive Program. We have 3 types of projects that are being looked at for this competitive program. They are planning, capital, and operating projects. So in terms of the planning projects, there isn't much change. $25,000 was the cap during the course of the previous fiscal year for planning projects. That remains. In terms of the amount of funds required for a local match, there is no local match for planning. That's not a change from the previous fiscal year either. Unlike some of the other type of projects, planning has remained the same. Capital projects are still going to involve funding either new services, replacing buses, equipment, or facilities, or working to expand facilities that already exist, providing for more equipment or buses. The only change with capital is the fact that it's now gone from a 90% eligible federal share requirement to being 100%. This means that there is no local match required for capital projects this year. For operating projects, for fiscal year 2021, all eligible tribes can apply for operating assistance. This is a change because previously tribes would need to be receiving less than $20,000 from the transit program's formula funds and also not have existing transit. This year, that's all been removed. All eligible tribes are eligible for operating assistance funds. In addition, the other change is that 100% eligible federal share is in place, which means, again, as we mentioned for capital, there is no local match required. And for all three types, the funding availability is the 3 years, so the year of allocation plus 2. We're now going to discuss over the course of the next few slides what exactly the grant project types you can apply for, what exactly they entail. So first up, we're going to talk about the planning grants. So for planning grants, applicants should describe the need for and the general scope of a proposed study. A study can be about providing a new service, the feasibility of providing a new service, or updating an existing plan for service. Again, as we mentioned in one slide ago, $25,000 is the cap on the planning grant award, and 100% federal share is the requirement. So I'm going to keep saying this a lot, but there is no local match required for planning grants. For fiscal year 2021's capital projects, the goal for this particular project type remains the same. Capital projects are there to increase efficiency and effectiveness and accessibility for riders and transit providers. And with that, capital projects can include, but are not limited to, the purchasing of expansion or replacement vehicles, say in the form of buses or vans, bus-related equipment. So we're talking about, in that case, fare equipment, communication devices. We're also looking under capital projects at the possibility of funding construction or rehabilitation of facilities. So that can be a transit maintenance and administrative facilities. Mobility management can also be considered a capital project. Wheelchair lifts and restraints, passenger shelters and bus stop signs. Technology, including computer hardware or software, can be considered as a capital project. And again, there is no local match required. We are doing this year a maximum 100% federal share. As displayed in the chart a few slides back, operating assistance typically has eligibility requirements related to formula funds received and transit system newness. For fiscal year 2021's competitive program, we've lifted all of those restrictions. So if you're looking for operating assistance projects, these are the type of things that could potentially be considered to be a project. The costs directly related to the service operations can include fuel, oil, drivers and dispatchers' salaries and fringe benefits, licensures, service agreements with private providers of public transportation services. Those all can be considered to be operating assistance type projects. And the common refrain for this entire presentation as it relates to the projects, there is no local match required. Again, maximum 100% share is involved. Okay. Now I'll be talking through the specific project evaluation criteria in sections that you'll see in the supplemental form that you'll be working on in Grants.gov. But before I do that, I want to make clear that we're evaluating these projects by different criteria depending on what type of project they are. So in terms of things like capital and operating projects, there's going to be 5 required sections in the supplemental form. Whereas with planning projects, you're only going to have 1 required section. So if you're submitting a capital or an operating project, please make sure that you have provided a detailed response to each of those 5 required categories. Likewise, if you're submitting a planning project, make sure the justification for your planning project is in the appropriate section. I know that this can be maybe a little bit confusing. One of the criteria for capital and operating projects is called planning. Sorry about that. But that's just one of the 5 required sections, and it's distinct from the section that is required if you're submitting a planning project. So just be cognizant of that. Here are the 5 criteria for operating and capital assistance projects. They go as follows. Planning and local/regional prioritization, project readiness, demonstration of need, demonstration of benefits, and financial commitment and operating capacity. These are how they're found within the NOFO and the supplemental form, but we'll give you an idea about how to focus your answer to get across your vision for your project to the person reviewing your request. A well-written planning section for capital and operating awards will be thorough and specific. It will also identify any aspects of the planning process that led you to identifying the need for your project. So to give you an idea of the things we're looking at specifically, we have some bullet points. Describe the planning document and/or the planning process conducted to identify the proposed project. Provide a detailed description of the project. Discuss level of support by community and/or tribal government. It's very important to discuss the support that you have in the community for the proposed project. This can be done by supplying support letters from the tribal government, from residents, anything to show that there is support in the community. Additionally, you could do something like a survey or other supporting documents that back the argument for the project. Describe what opportunities for public participation were provided and how proposed or existing services have been coordinated with. So when we're thinking about other services that could be linked into, we're talking about human service agencies, intercity bus transportation providers, or other rural public transit providers. Then also describe how mobility and client access needs of tribal human service agencies were considered. So I have a couple common refrains during the course of the presentation, one being the fact that there is no local match. The second one is, with these criteria, please provide your story. Please tell your story. You're painting a picture for the people reading the applications, and the more color commentary you can provide and relationships that you can show that exist within the community, that gives the reviewer a better idea about the nature of your project and how it will impact your specific community. Some additional things to think about as it relates to the planning and local regional prioritization criteria. Identify existing transportation services in and near the proposed or existing service area. Document in detail whether the project will provide coordination opportunities. With coordination opportunities, you're showing how the system will integrate, or your plan will integrate with other things around it and increase the efficiency potentially of transportation in a particular area. Describe how the proposed / existing service complements rather than duplicates any currently available service. So again, as I mentioned in the previous bullet, how exactly are you creating efficiencies potentially? These are all things that planning will hopefully be aimed at addressing. So give us an idea about how exactly you see that working in your particular area. Then if there's anything else that's not mentioned above or you haven't mentioned previously, you can also do that here. A lot of the idea, and I've mentioned this before with planning and prioritization, is talking about how exactly you're going to be interacting with other partners and stakeholders in the area, particularly as it relates to human services. We're looking at helping people get where they need to be. This isn't really an exhaustive list when we're talking about intercity bus providers, other transit agencies. There are other organizations out there that might just exist in your community. Talk about how exactly you'll be bringing them into the process, or how they will be aided by what you're attempting to provide in the community. This will help paint us a picture again of how exactly the transportation will be improved in your area, and provide a real resource to those who live in your communities. This next section is called Project Readiness. This is all about demonstrating the feasibility of your project and your ability to carry it out on time and successfully to deliver the outcomes that you discussed in your project plan. So if there's going to be a place where you talk about what exactly you're trying to do, let's just say you're looking to build a transit facility. A transit facility is going to require an environmental review. So this is where you discuss how much time you anticipate this environmental review will take, and demonstrate that you plan for it in this section. And that will give us an idea that you know what you're working on. So if there's, even in the case of getting a bus, you're going to need to go through a procurement process for that. Spell out for us the timeline that you have for procuring that vehicle. Again, you're trying to demonstrate to us that you have an understanding about what exactly it's going to take to get from receiving the award to actually completing and operating what you said you wanted to. In carrying out the demonstration of project readiness, or at least that you've plotted out how exactly you'll be ready to implement your project, we ask you to identify if the project is a categorical exclusion, or if there's a requirement for environmental analysis, as I was mentioning before. Describe and document a project implementation plan, which would include things like initial design of facility projects. Demonstrate that the project and project funds can be implemented and obligated quickly if selected. Demonstrate that the ability to carry out the proposed project successfully exists. Also, demonstrate the implementation schedule for the project. When evaluating demonstration of need for the operating and capital project applications, FTA will consider whether the project represents a one-time or periodic need that cannot reasonably be funded from FTA formula allocations or state and or local resources. When we're looking at both the operating and capital applications, some things that we will be looking for are looking at whether or not you're describing destinations and services not currently accessible by transit. Can you demonstrate need for those services where there is no service right now? Additionally, if there's a demonstration of need for things like access to jobs or health care, special needs of seniors or individuals with disabilities, income-based communities, as well as whether there's a need for mobility requirements. Those are all things that you can build out in your description about how the needs need to be met for those particular populations impacted. As it specifically relates to capital projects, particularly when we're looking at expansion, describe how the current or growing demand for the travel service necessitates the expansion. When we're looking at demonstration of need as it relates to capital replacement projects, you should include how the replacement may be necessary to maintain a transit system in a state of good repair. So if you need to list the age of your current asset, the condition of it, or the performance of it. Again, we need to know if you're going to be replacing vehicles or anything of that nature, why you need to do that. If an applicant received a planning grant in previous fiscal years, it should be indicated the status of that planning study, so we can get an idea about how the proposed project might relate to that particular study. With all this said, as I mentioned before, I have my refrains, and here is it again. This is storytelling. The demonstration of need is storytelling. Not all reviewers will have experience in rural areas or in tribal settings, so detailing what this project will mean to your community with specificity and by painting a picture could go a long way in making the case for your particular project. So if there's anything you can do to paint that picture to the best of your ability, please do it, because it goes a long way in helping us understand what exactly the project could possibly do for your community. The demonstration of benefits criteria. Here's where you can express how the project you've proposed will meet the needs that you've described previously. A good way to answer any of the questions going on here, to provide explanation to the reader, is to be specific about what the benefits will be, and then tie them into the needs that you described. What those benefits are, there could be a number of things, but it's important to describe them right here. It depends on what needs you're trying to address, but this is the section in which you do that. Again, we're talking about painting pictures here. So in doing that, you're going to need to identify expected or achieved project benefits. For existing services, increased or sustained ridership and daily trips, improved services, operations, or coordination, provide actual number of individual riders and trips, improve the quality of life for tribes and the surrounding community. For startup projects, how you would demonstrate benefits would be through an estimate of the number of daily one-way trips that might occur. Some qualitative benefits could be described to the tribe and the surrounding community. We do have a financial commitment and operating capacity criteria in our evaluation. However, this is going to be slightly impacted by the fact that fiscal year 2021 is different from previous fiscal years. There is no local match required in this fiscal year's competitive program, but local match actually can be included if desired. So I know during the course of the presentation I've been saying that a local match isn't required, but in fact, if you so desire, you can do a local match. If a tribe decides to do a local match, they must identify its source and any other source to support the proposed transit service funding. In thinking about the financial sustainability of a project, think about how the tribe will maintain the project past the award's life. So project a little bit about what the budgeting will be for this particular project and how exactly the tribe will keep this particular project alive once all the funding from the federal government in this particular award has been used up. As I suggested, you can demonstrate the sustainability financially through an annual operating budget that you might have. In your discussion about the financial commitment, you can explain how the project funds are going to be used in coordination with other services for efficient utilization of funds. So we discussed previously human service transportation funding. Those type of dollars are out there. do you have the ability to bring some of those funds in to help sustain this particular service? The Tribal Transit Program funds that are available through the Federal Highways Administration, that's another source. Title VI or Older American Act funds from Health and Human Services. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has access to the funds. There's in-kind contributions, commitment of support from local businesses, donations of land or equipment, and also tribal or community support. Ultimately, this is looking to tell us what exactly is the support you have in the community. And again, storytelling, descriptions, budgets, identifying other organizations that might be able to provide funds. That's exactly what you're needing to provide here in order to give us an idea about what the sustainability of this project could be. If you have any other questions related to local match, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. So my contact information is at the end of the presentation, but again, if you have any questions about local match, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, so we've got through our capital and operating evaluation criteria. And if you remember from the very beginning of this presentation, we were talking about criteria. Planning grants only have one real evaluation criteria. So if you're submitting a request for a planning grant, there's just this one section you need to fill out. This section is a lot less prescriptive than the other ones. And so what you're really looking to do here is describe how your tribe or your nation is going to, in the long term, provide a commitment to transit service and why you're doing this specific study. Please be specific about what you're planning to investigate. So describe ways the study would support you in implementing or enhancing your transit service. Again, it's just one section, but it needs to hit both of these 2 points that are listed. Since planning grants are so diverse, there's a lot of different ways that you could meet this particular criteria. So the 2 points that we're looking for you to address are, again, the tribe's long-term commitment to transit. Please spell out what exactly that looks like, any ideas that you might have about it, and how exactly you're going to go about studying that. And again, how the proposed study will be implemented and or further tribal transit. The study, again, is going to be looking at these things, but spell out for us how exactly you're going to go about doing that and eventually implementing whatever the conclusion could be. Okay, so we've made it through the bulk of our presentation, and the slide you see now is a number of hyperlinks to the various things that we've gone over or discussed during the course of this conversation that we've been having via PowerPoint. So some of the links we have here are to the NOFO that's published this year. We have a link to the Tribal Transit Program Award on Grants.gov. We also have the formula allocations that we discussed for this current fiscal year. We also listed our tribal entities landing page, which has a lot of good information as well as history about this specific program. And then we also have the Tribal Transit Competitive Program Award webpage, which actually links to some of the past recipients of our funds. So it's good for finding out historical information about this particular program and who's actually received funding from the award requests that they've submitted. On this slide, I have a listing of some of the technical assistance centers that work with FTA to provide more information about various aspects of transportation for our recipients. So we have the National Center for Mobility Management. During the course of the presentation, I did discuss how this is a funding opportunity to back mobility management. Also, we have the National Aging and Disability Transit Center. The Rural Transit Assistance Program, RTAP has a specific outfit dedicated to tribal issues. And then there's also the National Center for Applied Transit Technology. Continuing the topic of resources that are available to you, the National Transit Institute provides training, education, and a clearinghouse for services in support of public transportation. They do that through short-form webinars as well as multi-day in-person courses. I know for myself, I have done some of their coursework, and it's very, very informative, and you get the opportunity to interact with people in some instances from across the country and learn about how exactly they deal with their particular transit issues that they face in their communities. Just to give you an idea about some of the courses that are offered through NTI, advancing mobility management, growing your ridership, and understanding the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are all things that they offer, and in a lot of instances, it's free to government and transportation agency employees. So it might be well worth your while to see what exactly they're offering. Since we're still talking about resources, it's best to bring up one of the best resources that we have within the Federal Transit Administration. And of course, I'm talking about our regional tribal liaisons. So FTA has 10 regions throughout the United States. All but one of them has tribes located in it, and that's Region 3, which is around the DC area and the East Coast. But the rest of them have at least one person who's working with tribes in order to help tribes get the resources they need from FTA, as well as help them with questions they might have. So with this particular PowerPoint slide, if you have the presentation itself, you can go ahead and click on the link, and that will take you to a listing for all the tribal liaisons that we have within the agency. And feel free to utilize them. That's what they're here for, to answer your questions when you might have them related to the Tribal Transit Program. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, you're not watching the live recording from June 29th. You're watching something that's come a few days later. However, the questions that are going to be on the next couple slides were actually taken from the course of the conversation that we had on June 29th. So these were questions that came in via chat from people like you who are out working with tribal organizations and listening to the presentation and coming up with ideas and also questions. So these are some of the better questions I thought that might have some universal appeal. Again, I'll be giving you my contact information at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to go over a few of the questions in case you see something that can just be answered right here and right now. First up, we have a question about the local match. So as I mentioned throughout the course of the presentation, a local match isn't required. But this questioner was wondering whether or not we would recommend that a tribe do a local match. And if they did do a local match, would it mean that there would be a boost for their application in any way? My answer was, well, I can't tell you what to do in terms of whether or not you should provide a local match. That's solely going to be your determination based on your own set of criteria. What I will say, though, pertains to the second question. Does this boost an application anyway if you're saying that you're going to have a local match? The answer to that is no. We're going to be looking at these applications based on the criteria provided. One of those things is that the local match question is not going to be really germane to the questions at hand that we have. So I don't know if that's an exact answer, but the fact of the matter is that a local match will not provide a boost to your application anyway. There will not be any particular favoritism to recipients, potential recipients that is, who say that they will provide a local match. Here was a question that we had. Is real estate an acceptable expense? So this is an interesting question, because what are we really talking about? Are you talking about just buying a piece of land, period, point blank? Or are you talking about buying land to, say, build a bus barn on, which you'll have your transit vehicles go through and be stored? There's two fundamental differences there. In the first example, we were just saying buying a piece of land. We don't know exactly where that land is, what it's actually going to be doing. Therefore, that would be essentially a violation of the spirit of this program. So any purchase of real estate has to be germane to the delivery of transit services. So this could be considered a capital expense if we're talking about real estate being utilized to provide a transit benefit of some sort. Again, I mentioned an example of a bus barn. If you need land for a bus barn, that would be something acceptable as a capital type project. So the answer is it depends, but the qualifier is that the project needs to be pertaining to the delivery of the transit service in some way, shape, or form. The question here was kind of interesting. So stated on the PowerPoint slide says, can transportation costs for a purchased vehicle be covered? Just to give you kind of some background for this question, the person asking it was from a village in Alaska that has limited connection via roads to other places within the state. So this is a very practical question. How exactly do you get a transit vehicle if that's what you're trying to do? How do you get a transit vehicle to a place that's not easily accessible by road? To answer the question, yes, transportation costs for transporting a vehicle, for instance, can be covered. You just need to describe within your budget what exactly is going on in that respect. If you, for instance, are purchasing a vehicle, you would build that into your budgeting. But yes, the transportation cost for moving a piece of equipment can be covered by this particular funding. Next question. If a tribe operates a casino and has buses that take employees to and from the casino, would it be eligible for this grant, assuming that they meet the rural less than 50,000 population requirement? More specifically, are there limitations on tribes applying for a grant if they have a successful casino operation? Okay, I'm going to answer the second question first. Is there essentially a penalty or limitation on a tribe if they have a successful casino operation? The answer to that is no. We're not really concerned with the financial success of a casino operation that the tribe might have. What we're concerned with here is related to the transportation. So the question is bringing up having buses for employees to and from the casino, and asking whether or not that would be eligible for this particular award with the Tribal Transit Program. If it's just talking about the employees specifically of the casino, not anybody else, we're just talking about moving casino employees from point A to point B, that would in all likelihood not be covered by this program, because it's essentially a private service almost. That's getting away from the spirit of this program where we're talking about public transportation, so moving the public. The public can be casino employees, but it can't be exclusively casino employees. So if we're talking about moving people from the community to the casino, and the casino is, say, a stop along a transit route, that's okay. But when we're talking about severely limiting by employment the people who can be on the bus, and potentially sending federal dollars to that type of operation, that's essentially a violation of the spirit of public transportation. And so we would probably not be looking at a project that was talking about specifically moving employees for a casino from point A to point B. It has to be opened up broader to the community at large, as opposed to just a particular group of, say, employees of an organization. Here we had a question about for vehicles purchased with these funds, so with the TTP funds, do they need to meet Buy America requirements? This is a very simple answer. Yes, they do need to meet the Buy America requirements. That's how the federal government works. There is a Buy America requirement where a certain percentage of the vehicle or whatever is being purchased has to be built in America. So we do have language and we do have guidance on that. If you need to receive that, please talk to either myself, email myself, or your Tribal Transit Liaison, and we can direct you to the published language about Buy America. Our tribe does not have a reservation. We are a federally recognized tribe with trust land throughout Wisconsin. Do we qualify for Tribal Transit Program funds? If we think back to earlier slides that were defining what tribes were eligible, the answer, if we think about that, the answer to this question is yes. The tribe described here in the question is federally recognized. The problem I think some people have had when they've read our NOFO is that it mentions reservation or reservations. And I think some people have a perception that the program is limited to tribes that have a reservation, and that the transit has to be exclusively on the reservation. If we think about the presentation we just had, as well as some of the other language that's included in the NOFO, it says that first off, you have to be a federally recognized tribe. Once you've crossed that hurdle, then particularly as it relates to this program, the next question is about the size of the place where you're located. If you cross those thresholds, then you're all right being here. You do qualify. If you don't have reservation land, that's okay as well, because again, we're just in part looking at whether or not you're federally recognized. Our transit organization has been having trouble finding enough qualified transit drivers. With a training program for transit drivers that provides financial assistance for tribal members for obtaining medical cards and commercial driver's license testing, be an eligible operating assistance project? The answer is yes. If you have the opportunity to go back and look at the slides and presentation related to operating assistance, one of the bullet points listed as being something that could be funded was for licensures. A CDL will qualify for that. So the answer to this question is yes. If a tribe needs to purchase COVID-19 protective equipment for their transit system, so here we're talking about things like masks or clear barriers that could be used to separate, say, a driver from riders, would that be eligible as a capital cost or an operating cost? So for the things that were kind of described in this question, these would be capital expenses. We're talking about things that are going to be going in the bus, particularly when we're talking about barriers. That's equipment on the bus. That's a capital expense. With that said, though, I just really want to express to tribes, if you do have a need for COVID-related equipment, whether, as was suggested here, masks, barriers, there are funds set aside specifically to fund those type of purchases. What we mentioned previously related to the COVID funds that were made available to tribes, there are dollars still out there. So we're talking about CARES Act dollars, we're talking about CRISA funds, and we're talking about, more recently, ARP funds. All those have been designated for COVID-related response. And as a result, they are funding things like masks and barriers. So instead of focusing efforts in trying to purchase those things through the Tribal Transit Program Competitive Fund, I suggest that you look towards those COVID targeted funds to take care of those type of items, because there are a number of dollars that are still out there for allocation. And what I would really hope didn't happen is that instead of funding a project that you need in your community through the TTP competitive program, you were utilizing your time and your effort to fund, say, masks when it could be done with dollars specifically designated to address COVID issues that are already out. So please just make sure that as a tribe you have tapped into those funds. In the case of the COVID-related funds, they are all formula, which means if you've been entering data into the National Transit Database, there should be a formula allocation for you. So please, if you need to do things or make purchases related to COVID or COVID-related equipment, please make sure that you're tapping into those specific funds designated for that, as opposed to utilizing the competitive for that. All right, so this is our final question. How long do awardees have to complete their projects? For example, do they have 2 years or 3 years? So let's think about this question in a couple ways. So in the presentation, we said that you have 3 years before your awards become lapsing. So you have 3 years from the time that you receive the award to actually spend $1 on something related to the project you said you were going to do. So you have up to 3 years to actually spend funds. In terms of completing a project, let me just say that prior to coming over to the Tribal Transit Program, I worked for FTA looking at grants that needed to be closed because they had been open for an extended period of time, but either didn't have expenditures or there was some other type of issue that was causing the project associated with them to not take place. I did have Tribal Transit Program awards on my list. So in these cases, the projects would have been in existence for basically more than 3 years. So to answer the question, you have up to 3 years to spend $1 before the funds could revert back to FTA. However, the project is going to really be dictated by what the conditions are on the ground. So it might take you longer than you anticipated to get the project done. So there is no hard date, but at the same time, once you're done with this application process and say that you're awarded the award, there's another piece of FTA that's actually looking to see that the progress occurs on the award. So take from that what you will, but please, if you're stating in your documents what your timeline is, please stay as true as possible to the timeline that you established and you presented to us, because the last thing we want is to potentially not fund a project that had a really good application but fund another one that eventually does not happen because of a not well thought out course of action to complete the project. So just be honest with yourself and your organization about what it will take to get the project done, and hopefully we won't have to worry about how long it takes you to get done because you'll stay true to your original plan. All right, so that concludes the presentation related to the Notice of Funding opportunity for the Tribal Transit Program. I'd like to thank you for being here for the presentation, and I also wanted just to provide my contact information. I know this application process can be tedious and to some degree nerve-wracking. So what I want to encourage you to do, if you have any issues, have any questions, please reach out to me. I have my email address at tribaltransit@dot.gov. That, I will say, is the best way to get in contact with me, in part because it allows me to, if need be, send you links via email, keeps a record for us of the correspondence that we have. But if you're more comfortable talking via phone, that's also an option. It's just more so that we aren't in the office right now, so getting access to the phone can be a little bit trickier, but I understand that some people prefer to have a voice-to-voice conversation, and I am not against that if it's required. So feel free to get in contact with me. Don't let any questions linger longer than they have to, because this is all about getting these resources out, and the best way to do that is to talk to us and let us know what you need. Like I said, I'm a resource. Our FTA regional liaisons are resources. Do not hesitate getting in contact with us and utilizing us as resources. Thank you. Hello once again, this is Carl Melton, and as I mentioned earlier on in our presentation, I was going to go through a few slides that are related to the Grants.gov experience. Again, these are primarily just screen captures, so you have some familiarity when you actually go into Grants.gov about what the general layout is for the system. And I can just preface this with saying that Grants.gov is not an FTA system. At the end of the presentation, there will be some contact information directing you to the people you need to talk to if you do have an issue of Grants.gov. Unfortunately, we can't do anything on the FTA side related to it. You have to go directly to Grants.gov's help desk, and they can assist you with the technical issues that you might face with just the fact that you're dealing with a system online. The first set of screen captures we have here are actually from FTA's website, specifically the FTA Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO. If you're in this presentation, you probably already are familiar with the FTA website and specifically with the location of the NOFO announcement on it. Again, this announcement went out in May, and this is where you can be directed to the various locations for the NOFO, either on the Federal Register site or even within Grants.gov. So when we first go to FTA's website, you will see a tab that says funding on it. When you click on that funding tab, there's going to be a broader menu that opens up. And one of the options there that you can select will take you to the Notice of Funding Opportunities page. So on that Notice of Funding Opportunity page, there's going to be essentially all of the NOFOs that exist for FTA at that point in time. It will give you the date in which the NOFO went live, as well as the closing date, and the opportunity ID, as well as a general description in title form for the award. On this particular slide, we're looking at the NOFO page, and the square or rectangle rather that is there is highlighting the opportunity ID for the Public Transportation on Indian Reservations Program FY 2021 Notice of Funding Opportunity. On the actual website, you would click on the opportunity ID, and it would then take you to the web page that you see on the right where the NOFO is spelled out. So on that NOFO page, once you click on it, you're going to see the details of the specific NOFO as well as a summary. And there will also be included in it hyperlinks to, again, the Federal Register and to the Grants.gov page for the specific award. At the bottom of the slide, we have some hyperlinks that you can, once you have this slide deck, you can click on them and make it to the FTA website, as well as the Funding Opportunity Notices page is also located on the FTA website. Once we're on FTA's NOFO page and we've clicked on the specific NOFO, we are supplied with several pieces of information. So again, we have the summary description, which has the application requirements and the eligibility. The supplemental form for the award is included there as well as links to Grants.gov, program information, and other references. With the additional elements that are on the page, I just want to point out that as it relates to the supplemental form, it's important that you use the form that is on this page. Every single year there are supplemental forms that are issued for NOFOs. So you can't use the supplemental form that existed for last year's NOFO for the tribal program for this year. You have to use the supplemental form that's associated with this specific NOFO. If we look at the yellow text box that we have here, the FTA NOFO provides a hyperlink to the Grants.gov Opportunity Notice and related documents and application package. Next up, we're going to click on that link and it's going to take us to the Grants.gov. But I also want to point out the fact that we do have another link that will take you to the grants notice page within FTA's website here at the very bottom of the slide. Okay, so let's imagine that we clicked on that ID that was hyperlinked in the NOFO on the FTA page. We clicked on that and it takes us over to Grants.gov. As I mentioned in the presentation earlier, Grants.gov is where you're actually going to be submitting your application for this particular Notice of Funding opportunity. Here we have a couple of screen captures from Grants.gov. So as we can see, we have a synopsis tab, which gives us the basic information about the NOFO. We have history, related documents, as well as a tab called Packages. If we look over to one of our other screen captures, we have a Related Documents tab that's been clicked on, and in there it gives a listing of the different forms that are associated with the NOFO. So in this case, we have the funding announcement itself. We have the Federal Register notice that appeared in the Federal Register, and we have a supplemental form that's been provided in the related documents. In the Package tab, you have essentially what is a zip file with several documents included in it. One of those forms being the SF424. At this point, it's important to note that anybody can access the related documents and package tabs and download those documents. However, if you haven't done this already, what you need to be aware of is the fact that you have to be registered with Grants.gov to actually submit any documents into it. So if you or anybody in your organization does not have access yet to Grants.gov, please go about the process to get that access. So anyone as well as yourself can look at the documents and work on them outside of Grants.gov. But when it comes time to actually apply, you need to have that access to Grants.gov to submit. In these screen captures, we're looking specifically at the Package tab. And I mentioned in the previous slide that one of the forms included in there is the one that we see in the upper right here, the SF424. SF stands for standard form because this is the form that all applicants for grants have to fill out across the federal government. It's again the standard form. So we've highlighted some of the text that you have to enter in, or highlighted the text box that you need to fill in for the particular award. And then we also included a screen capture of the attachments form. So you'll have the opportunity to submit additional documentation. I mentioned in the presentation the need or the desire you might have to show support for your particular project with, say, letters of recommendation essentially from members of your tribe, from your community, from leadership of the tribe. This is where you would take care of that in the attachments form. In this slide, we have captures of the forms that are in the application package. So in the application package, we have the FTA supplemental form as well as the previously mentioned SF424. The FTA supplemental form is a form created by FTA specifically for this NOFO. As I said before, you don't want to use last year's supplemental form for this one because we've had changes in the program, and to use a previous year's form when we've had changes in the program just won't work. So please do not use any previous forms from past fiscal years to do this work. Utilize everything that's provided for you in the Grants.gov. Here we have some captures from the Grants.gov website, giving an example of what happens when we click on the Applicants tab. I mentioned previously that if you're going to be applying for an award via Grants.gov, you're going to have access to it. So what we're going to be talking about from here to pretty much the end of this part of the presentation is getting into Grants.gov and then seeing what exactly it looks like once you get in there. For new applicants to Grants.gov or to federal funds, the Grants.gov site will assist you with the registration process and award management and with obtaining the registration. Registered organizations can create a workspace in which grant proposal teams can collaborate in developing the application proposal and associated documents. This workspace eliminates the need for emailing documents between team members. Grants.gov has been enhanced to allow a workspace in which you can share various tasks to develop the application. This is also the place in which authorized organization representatives can submit the completed application to Grants.gov. Please review the workspace information in Grants.gov and identify the type of workspace and team members who will prepare your application. Please review the rules and privileges and remember that only the authorized organization representative can submit the application. FTA accepts applications submitted via Grants.gov from organizations, not individuals. Such organizations must be registered in Grants.gov. All the information and pertinent links are available on the Applicant tab of Grants.gov. Last, if you encounter technical issues or problems while working on an application or submitting the application, please address those concerns with Grants.gov. And here's an example of what a workspace could look like within Grants.gov. Again, this part of the website is here to help if you've got multiple people working on your grant application, help you all coordinate and submit information to each other so you can produce the best application possible. And finally, here are some links related to the application process, the grants application process, that you might find handy. Again, I just want to stress that Grants.gov is not an FTA supported website. If you have any issues with Grants.gov, please contact their support center to get the help that you need. If you see here on the page, the third bullet down, this is the information you need to have in order to address your Grants.gov issues. Give them a call at their help desk, or you can email them at support@grants.gov. And with that, we have concluded the Grants.gov overview. I just want to say once again, thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have any questions related to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, please contact me at tribaltransit@dot.gov. If you have any questions related to Grants.gov, please get in contact with their help desk. Once again, Grants.gov is not an FTA operated platform or managed platform, so we have no ability to provide technical assistance related to the grant applications on that side. But if you have any questions related to the NOFO or anything of that nature, please do not hesitate reaching out to myself or any of the FTA Tribal Liaisons. Thank you so much and have a great day.